The Trump administration under fire on many fronts tonight. House Democrats just marched out of this unusual briefing by Trump officials, blasting it as propaganda aimed at diverting this impeachment probe. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Pompeo now openly admits he was on Trump's collusion call. And while Congress is technically on recess, today showed more starkly than ever how things are changing with this scene. Speaker Pelosi, you see here, walking out to the lectern, showing she's in this fight. She's in the lead, and she's making clear who the Democrats are positioning as the top prosecutor in any case against Trump. Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff. It's his committee that did what so many other Democrats and Trump critics have not to date, and it was Schiff who joined Pelosi in this unified front today.
We do place ourselves in a time of urgency on the threat to the Constitution.
Any effort by the Secretary, by the President, or anyone else to interfere will be considered as evidence of obstruction.
We see the actions of this president being an assault on the Constitution. We had no choice but to go forward.
We're not fooling around here.
A stark warning to a president who's long claimed he welcomes impeachment, that it would help him politically. Well, today, the president did not seem to be celebrating the march towards this as some kind of political boost. He wasn't taunting House Democrats to finish the job, which is what someone would say if they wanted to be impeached. No, the president personally attacked Chairman Schiff and advocated, and I say this explicitly, he advocated two separate potential crimes in his remarks today. The advocacy of exposing the whistleblower against federal law, and the advocacy of a treason investigation of a member of the opposition party.
We don't call him Shifty Schiff for nothing. He's a shifty, dishonest guy. He made up my conversation. He actually made it up. It should be criminal. It should be treasonous. Frankly, they should look at him for treason. This country has to find out who that person was, because that person's a spy. But you people should be ashamed of yourself. Okay, I think I've answered most of your questions. What do you think? Yes?
He did not answer most of the questions. In fact, at a press conference today, a Wire reporter in the room confronted the president over ducking the core question of whether Donald Trump sought illegal help to target Joe Biden. More evidence of a fact that we've noted on this show since this whole story broke open. The president has gone from 2 years of no collusion to being, in public, pro-collusion, admitting that was the request on the Ukraine call and declining basic opportunities to deny it. Today, he trashed Biden without denying that he requested that collusion.
Look, Biden and his son are stone cold crooked, and you know it.
Welcome to 2020. Trump insists, I guess, anyone running against him is crooked, while Speaker Pelosi says the real news here is that Donald Trump is scared.
I think the president knows the argument that can be made against him, and he's scared. And so he's trying to divert attention from that to we're standing in the way of legislation.
You see,
Now, that's just some of the top news on this huge story right now, and we haven't even gotten to Joe Biden's new response or the pressure on Giuliani to say whether he even is Donald Trump's lawyer, or to some Trump cabinet officials like Rick Perry who say they will be more cooperative with Congress than other parts of Trump's government. Those are stories breaking today, as well as this New York Times report crossing the wire with new details on the lengths the whistleblower went to get incriminating information to Congress. So let's take a moment to mark where we are in this story right now. The Ukraine scandal has clearly upended the Trump administration, unlike anything we've seen since the appointment of special counsel Robert Mueller. The Democrats are now marching towards something that Pelosi had long resisted. And I got to tell you, as we try to make sense of all this, just watching her today, it is clear now a vote on impeaching Trump looks more likely. Pelosi is narrowing the options of any kind of D.C. off-ramp when she publicly names the president an urgent threat to the Constitution, and when her caucus is prepping these new impeachment subpoenas from, count them, 3 different committees today and setting new deadlines for the end of this week. And then there is the president's response. You need to know this. He's not denying the core evidence that he sought foreign help to try to criminally take out a domestic rival. He stands accused of abusing his power to target domestic opponents and responds by threatening to target his domestic opponents. Let me repeat that, because we are in grave territory. one of the most consequential things the president is now doing is that he faces potential impeachment for criminally targeting a top domestic rival, Joe Biden. And he is responding right now, today, by threatening to criminally target another domestic rival, Adam Schiff, who is, of course, leading one of the probes into Trump targeting Biden. This is not a drill. This is a test in real time right now of our constitutional system of government. And remember, many thought the test would come during the Mueller probe because Trump ousted 2 FBI directors and attempted to obstruct the probe. But here's the thing about why that went down differently. It's something that you know as a news viewer about Bob Mueller. He sticks to the book. He doesn't lean into testing our system of government. He didn't demand the president sit for an interview, and he didn't recommend impeachment, as other prosecutors investigating presidents have done. And so that test, it never came. And legal experts say that was a mark of fairness and restraint by Mueller. But the Ukraine call notes show Donald Trump didn't see it that way. We know from his own White House, he told the Ukraine prime minister the day after Mueller testified that Mueller gave a, quote, incompetent and poor performance. Trump didn't wait a week or a month. It was the very next day that he hatched this new collusion plot. And unlike Mueller, whatever you think of Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, and he has his fans, many of them across the country, something we know about him that people agree on, Donald Trump does lean into testing this system of government. He's doing it right now. And that makes what comes next very, very significant. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.